Ever been tossed aside while lying in a hospital bed fighting for your life? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Subscribe if you believe that people who discard you at your weakest eventually learn that the person they replaced was never as easily substituted as they imagined. Because what I'm about to share proves that when someone removes you in your most vulnerable moment, life has a way of forcing them to return, needing the very abilities they dismissed. My name is Brynn. I'm 38. An operations strategist who once built the systems that kept an entire organization functioning smoothly. And the day I stepped back into the same company that replaced me during my cancer treatment, this time as the outside consultant hired to repair the chaos my substitute caused, was the moment I realized something important. Revenge isn't always about destruction. Sometimes it's about becoming so essential, so undeniably competent, that the people who underestimated you must confront the magnitude of what they lost. But before I tell you about that boardroom and the executive director who had no choice but to plead for my expertise, let me take you back to where loyalty shattered, and illness became someone else's golden opportunity. I had dedicated 9 years to Northpoint Solutions, starting as a coordinator and eventually becoming the director of operations. At 35, I was the core functional architect of the 200-employee logistics and supply chain firm, responsible for everything from client projects to internal optimization. My dedication, long hours, and competence had made me the most trusted lieutenant to the executive director, Quinn Harwell, who founded Northpoint 15 years prior. Quinn was strategically brilliant but operationally disorganized, relying on me to translate his vision into functional systems. When I was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer, I faced an aggressive 6-month treatment plan involving surgery, chemo, and radiation, with a good prognosis contingent on strict adherence to the protocol. This necessitated an extended medical leave, but I fully intended to return to my role. I met with Quinn to discuss my timeline, and he was initially supportive. He assured me my health was the priority, and my job would be waiting upon my return. Believing in our decade-long relationship, I spent 3 weeks meticulously documenting my role. I created detailed process manuals, updated all files, and trained my assistant, Wesley, on critical tasks before I left. Quinn chose to distribute my responsibilities rather than hire a temporary replacement. Wesley would handle daily operations, managers would cover client issues, and Quinn would handle strategic decisions. This seemed reasonable for a temporary absence. My treatment began in January. While the surgery was successful, the chemotherapy was brutal. The exhaustion, nausea, and cognitive fog were debilitating. For the first month I tried to stay engaged remotely, but by February the treatments became overwhelming, forcing me to completely withdraw and focus on my recovery. Unbeknownst to me, a major shift was underway at Northpoint. Quinn brought in an outside consultant, Sonia, a 42-year-old known for ruthless restructuring. Hired to review efficiency during my leave, Sonia saw my absence as an opportunity. She convinced Quinn that my established systems were outdated and stalling progress, arguing that sweeping upgrades were essential. Quinn, easily swayed by confident, bold ideas, gave her expanding authority. By March, 2 months into my treatment, Sonia was effectively running operations. In early May, Wesley called, sounding deeply concerned. He told me that Sonia had replaced most of my processes, was claiming I wasn't returning, and was actively positioning herself as the new operations director, all while I was still on medical leave. I was in chemotherapy, barely able to think through the fog when Wesley told me what Quinn had said. I asked him to repeat it, hoping I'd misunderstood. He hesitated, admitting Quinn wasn't questioning Sonia at all. He seemed convinced she was an improvement. Then Wesley said he feared they planned to eliminate my role while I was still on leave. The news devastated me, piling onto what I was already fighting. But I was too sick to respond, unable to work or advocate for myself, focused only on getting through treatment. 4 months into my medical leave, HR delivered a notice. My director of operations position was being eliminated due to a company restructuring. They offered a 3-month severance package, completely ignoring my 9 years of dedication and the difficult fact that I was actively undergoing cancer treatment. Distraught, I confronted Quinn, asking how he could justify this betrayal. He coldly insisted business needs had shifted, and a replacement, Sonia, was bringing new capabilities. It felt deeply personal, as if my years of loyalty vanished the moment I became vulnerable. I consulted an employment attorney, who was sympathetic but candid. While the timing was morally reprehensible, the company had the legal right to eliminate positions during restructuring. Proving the termination was due to my medical leave rather than legitimate business reasons would be an expensive and arduous legal battle. Given the high cost of my ongoing cancer treatment, I couldn't afford to drain my resources on litigation. I accepted the severance, signed the agreement, and focused solely on completing my treatment. By August, 6 months after starting chemotherapy, I finished the protocol. Scans confirmed I was in remission. Exhausted and traumatized by the experience, I was alive. My immediate task was to rebuild my career while processing the profound betrayal. I dedicated September and October to physical and emotional recovery. During this time, I began documenting everything I knew about Northpoint's operations, a cathartic exercise where I detailed the systems, relationships, and 9 years of institutional knowledge I had built. In November, a full year post-diagnosis, my oncologist cleared me for full-time work. My energy and cognitive sharpness had returned. I began applying for operations director roles at other companies. However, the job market proved challenging. Explaining the year-long gap was difficult. Some interviewers were sympathetic, others concerned about hiring an applicant with a serious health history. After 2 months without success, I pivoted. I decided against traditional employment and launched an independent consulting practice, Brynn Strategic Solutions, specializing in operations strategy and system implementation. I marketed my expertise in building scalable infrastructure. My first client, a former Northpoint colleague, was highly satisfied and provided referrals. By March, 15 months after my diagnosis, my consulting practice was thriving with a steady client flow. My rates significantly surpassed my previous Northpoint salary, offering both financial security and health management flexibility. Then, in April, I received a surprising call from Wesley, my former assistant still at Northpoint. He warned me that the company was in a disastrous state. Sonia's restructuring had failed, client satisfaction had plummeted, and revenue was down 30%. Northpoint, he said, was struggling badly, and Quinn was in a panic. A swirl of emotions hit me at once. There was a sharp sense of satisfaction knowing Sonia's improvements had collapsed, mixed with worry for the coworkers I'd left behind, and a growing curiosity about what had actually unraveled. I asked Wesley what exactly was failing. "Everything you handled," he said without hesitation. The client relationships I'd built were deteriorating because no one understood the delicate human balance involved. The vendor agreements I had negotiated were now being mishandled. The new project systems Sonia introduced were overly complex, ignored by most, and causing chaos. The company was bleeding money and credibility. Even Quinn finally admitted he'd made a huge mistake letting me go. 2 weeks later, I received a formal inquiry from a business development agency seeking an operations consultant for a company in serious trouble. The 3-month contract paid almost my former annual salary. I agreed to meet and hear the details. At the neutral conference site, the representative explained the client's operational collapse, then revealed the name: Northpoint Solutions. I absorbed the news in stunned silence. Quinn, completely unaware, had hired an intermediary to find an operations consultant, and that search had led directly to me. The irony was palpable. I asked the representative if the client knew they had specifically approached me. "Not yet," she confirmed. "We identified you based purely on your expertise in operations and systems implementation. Your profile matched their urgent needs precisely. Should we inform them of the potential match before proceeding?" I deliberated carefully. Part of me wanted to refuse immediately, allowing Northpoint to reap the full consequences of their betrayal. Yet, a deeper part saw this as the ultimate vindication. The company that discarded me during cancer treatment now desperately needed my skills to rectify the disaster created by my replacement. "Let them know it's me," I instructed. If they still want to proceed knowing who the consultant is, we can discuss my terms. The representative contacted Northpoint and called me back 30 minutes later. They want to move forward. Quinn specifically requested a direct meeting with you to discuss the engagement. I agreed to meet Quinn at a neutral coffee shop. He arrived looking noticeably older and stressed. The turmoil of the past year was etched onto his face. "Brynn, thank you for meeting me," he said, sinking heavily into his chair. "I know you have every reason to refuse. What I did, eliminating your position while you were fighting cancer, was unconscionable. I was wrong. I let Sonia convince me that mere change equaled improvement, failing to prioritize proven competence and loyalty." His apology was unexpectedly direct, but words alone were insufficient. I needed to gauge the depth of the crisis and his true level of remorse. "Tell me specifically what is failing," I demanded. Quinn then detailed the catastrophic decline. Sonia had swapped my integrated systems for disparate tools that lacked communication. She had abandoned my careful system of matching client needs to team strengths, leading to chaotic project assignment. She had slashed vendor costs without understanding the relationship equity I'd built that guaranteed priority service. This resulted in operational chaos, project delays, plummeting client satisfaction due to lack of continuity, and vendors only providing minimum contractual service. Revenue had collapsed, and Sonia had resigned 2 months prior. Quinn, lacking operational expertise, had failed to stabilize the situation. "What do you need from me?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "I need you to fix what's broken," he stated bluntly. "Restore the working systems, rebuild the client relationships, and get operations functional again. You are the only person who understands Northpoint's operations deeply enough to repair this damage." I let him sit in his desperation before stating my terms. "I will take the engagement as an independent consultant, not an employee. My rate is $5,000 per day for 3 months, payable weekly. I demand full operational authority during this engagement, without interference. I require a formal written apology from you and the board, acknowledging that my termination during medical leave was unequivocally wrong. Finally, I want the option to convert this into a permanent executive role at triple my previous salary if I choose to return full-time." Quinn, desperate, agreed instantly. "I will present your terms to the board today. You are our best option to save this company." The board approved my terms within 24 hours. A formal written apology arrived by courier that evening, signed by Quinn and every board member. It acknowledged the poor judgment of my termination during cancer treatment, recognized the undervaluation of my contributions, and expressed the company's profound regret. My first day back at Northpoint was surreal. I walked into the building where I'd worked for 9 years, but now as an expensive consultant rather than a loyal employee. Former colleagues greeted me with mixture of relief and awkwardness. Everyone knew what had happened, knew I'd been fired during cancer treatment, knew Sonia's replacement had failed spectacularly. My return represented both vindication and implicit condemnation of leadership that had made such catastrophic decisions. I started by assessing the full scope of damage. I reviewed client satisfaction scores, project completion rates, vendor performance metrics, and employee morale surveys. Every indicator had declined significantly since my departure. Sonia had implemented changes for the sake of change, replacing functional systems with complicated alternatives that looked sophisticated but worked poorly in practice. Over the next 2 weeks, I methodically dismantled Sonia's changes and restored my original systems with improvements. I rebuilt the project tracking infrastructure using simple tools people would actually use consistently. I reviewed client assignments and reassigned accounts to maximize relationship fit. I contacted vendors to repair relationships and renegotiate terms based on partnership rather than just cost minimization. The response from employees was overwhelming relief. They'd been struggling with Sonia's complicated systems for months. Returning to processes that actually worked improved both efficiency and morale immediately. Client relationships took longer to repair. Several major accounts had left and wouldn't return regardless of operational improvements. I concentrated on calming the clients we still had and stopping any more from leaving. I reached out personally to every major account, admitted where our service had fallen short, and laid out the concrete fixes already underway. Many agreed to stay with Northpoint because they trusted my leadership and credibility. By the end of my first month, the turnaround was visible. Operational indicators were climbing. Projects were being completed on schedule again. Client satisfaction scores were improving. Employee morale reports showed a dramatic lift. The freefall had finally ended. The next challenge was igniting real growth. Quinn attended weekly updates where I briefed him on developments. Our relationship had shifted completely. I was no longer simply executing his directives. I had become the authority he relied on, the one person capable of keeping his company alive. The role reversal was unmistakable. In one meeting, he asked why Sonia's supposedly advanced tools had failed so badly. I explained that her systems were built on idealized workflows, while mine were based on how people actually operate. Messy, imperfect, inconsistent. Her rigidity caused breakdowns. My flexibility prevented them. Only then did Quinn grasp how costly replacing me had been. Operational systems depend on understanding people, culture, and real work, not just technology. 18 months after my termination, I finally gained enough clarity to reflect on everything: the cancer diagnosis, the betrayal that followed, and eventually my return to professional stability. The entire experience forced me to confront difficult truths about loyalty, vulnerability, and how quickly people compromise their values when convenience becomes more important than integrity. Quinn chose to rely on Sonia's promises instead of standing by the person who had built his operational backbone for nearly 10 years. That choice cost his company millions and destroyed relationships that had taken years to cultivate. Yet the ordeal also revealed my resilience and undeniable value. I survived cancer. I built a successful independent practice. I demonstrated that operational mastery isn't replaceable. It's earned through years of specialized work. My consulting brought more income, autonomy, and satisfaction than any traditional role ever had. 2 years after my diagnosis, I was thriving in every area of my life. My cancer remained in remission, my clients were steady, and I finally reached true financial security. What brought me the greatest sense of justice was watching Northpoint, the company that abandoned me during illness, now depend on my expertise. Quinn and I rebuilt our relationship with firm boundaries, mutual respect, and a clear understanding of my worth. After my presentation, the board chair approached me privately. She acknowledged that the difficult truths I presented were necessary, admitting, "We failed you and we failed the company by allowing your termination." She then formally offered me a permanent position as Chief Operating Officer, COO. With full executive authority and the compensation package I had originally specified. Having anticipated this offer, my answer was ready. I expressed my appreciation but stated I was not interested in returning as an employee. My consulting practice was thriving, granting me autonomy and flexibility I had never enjoyed at Northpoint. I countered with an offer for a retained consultant arrangement, providing ongoing strategic operations guidance on my own terms and schedule. The board accepted this. This arrangement gave me the influence I previously held without the vulnerability of being an employee who could be terminated during a medical crisis. 3 months into the intensive phase of my engagement, Northpoint's operations were stable, systems were functional, and metrics were strong. I transitioned into the less demanding retained role, focusing on my rapidly growing consulting practice. The Northpoint turnaround generated substantial publicity, prompting other companies to seek out the consultant who had successfully rescued their operations. As demand grew, my rates increased, resulting in significantly higher earnings than the offered CO salary, all while retaining autonomy. 6 months after my return, I attended an industry conference where Quinn was speaking on operational resilience. Publicly, he acknowledged the company's recent struggles and recovery, specifically crediting me. He confessed that eliminating operational leadership during my personal crisis was a critical mistake, for which they paid dearly. He admitted their arrogance in thinking my systems could be easily replaced, stating, "Repairing that mistake required hiring her back as a consultant at rates far exceeding what we'd paid her as an employee." His public acknowledgment of organizational failure was unexpected but appreciated, showcasing more courage than a private apology would have. After the panel, numerous attendees approached me, eager to hire me for similar consulting. My calendar filled, and my practice continued its rapid expansion. A year after being fired during cancer treatment, I was professionally thriving, surpassing my previous achievements. The betrayal during my most vulnerable time inadvertently created a unique opportunity for growth that traditional employment never could have offered. 18 months after the termination, I gained enough distance to reflect on the entire ordeal, from the cancer diagnosis and the subsequent betrayal to my professional resurgence. The experience revealed harsh truths about misplaced loyalty and how easily integrity is abandoned for convenience. Quinn's decision to trust flawed assurances over his dedicated operational builder cost the company millions and shattered years of established relationships. Conversely, the ordeal affirmed my strength and worth. I had overcome cancer and built a flourishing independent practice, proving that operational expertise is essential and not interchangeable. My consulting work brought greater income and fulfillment than any job. 2 years after my diagnosis, I was financially stable and flourishing, with my health stable. The deepest satisfaction came from knowing Northpoint, which once discarded me, now relied heavily on my guidance. Quinn and I successfully rebuilt a relationship based on mutual respect and firm boundaries. He valued my expertise due to the high cost of losing it, and I valued the work because it provided excellent compensation without the inherent risks of employment. 3 years after my diagnosis, Northpoint had fully recovered from the operational collapse. Revenue exceeded previous highs. Client satisfaction was strong. The company was growing again with me providing strategic operational guidance as retained consultant. My role in the recovery was well known in industry circles. I was frequently invited to speak at conferences about operational strategy, system design, and organizational resilience. My consulting practice had expanded beyond operations into broader strategic advisory for growing companies. The cancer experience had fundamentally changed my relationship with work. I'd learned that loyalty to employers was often unreciprocated, that vulnerability could be exploited rather than supported, that building independent value was more secure than relying on any single organization. These lessons shaped how I advised clients and mentored younger professionals. I emphasized building skills and relationships that were transferable, documenting your contributions, and maintaining financial reserves that allowed for independence. I warned against assuming employer loyalty would be reciprocated during personal crises. 4 years post-diagnosis, I was invited to speak at a healthcare industry conference about working through serious illness. The presentation addressed my cancer treatment and recovery, but focused primarily on the employment betrayal and subsequent professional rebuilding. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people shared similar stories of being fired, demoted, or pushed out during medical crises. The pattern was depressingly common. Employers claiming to value employees would dispose of them quickly when illness became inconvenient. My story struck a chord because I hadn't just endured the betrayal, I had risen far beyond it. The organization that dismissed me while I was undergoing treatment eventually found itself relying on the very expertise it had cast aside. The executive director who once removed my role now routinely sought my guidance. Everything about the hierarchy had shifted. 5 years after my diagnosis, I wrote a reflective article titled, "What Companies Lose When They Discard Expertise in Crisis." In it, I outlined how Northpoint's operations unraveled after my departure and the financial consequences of losing someone with deep institutional knowledge. The piece gained rapid traction, circulating through HR networks, leadership forums, and business strategy publications. Soon, companies began approaching me for audits of their internal systems and succession processes. They wanted to avoid the same vulnerabilities Northpoint had exposed. In response, I built a consulting practice focused on identifying operational weak points and strengthening organizational resilience. By the 6th year, my once solo venture had grown into a firm of 5 consultants, generating more than $2 million annually. Quinn remained a client, just one of many. Northpoint still retained my services, but no longer controlled my livelihood. That autonomy became my greatest triumph, far more meaningful than any act of revenge. 7 years after my cancer diagnosis, I attended Northpoint's annual leadership retreat as invited consultant. During dinner, Quinn gave a speech acknowledging people who'd contributed to the company's success over the years. He spent significant time discussing my contributions, both during my initial 9-year employment and through my consulting work after being fired. Brynn built the operational foundation that made this company successful, Quinn said to the assembled leadership team. When I made the mistake of letting her go during her medical leave, we experienced catastrophic operational failure that cost millions to repair. She returned as a consultant, not because she needed us but because she's generous enough to help despite how poorly we treated her. Her success since then, building her own thriving practice, proves that her value was never dependent on Northpoint. We needed her far more than she needed us. The acknowledgment was public, permanent, and frank about organizational failure. After the speech, several Northpoint leaders approached me expressing gratitude for my work and regret about how my termination had been handled. The vindication was complete. Not because I destroyed Quinn or Northpoint, but because everyone now understood clearly what had been lost when they disposed of me during medical crisis and what it had cost to recover from that decision. 8 years after diagnosis, I was thriving in every measurable way. My cancer remained in remission with excellent long-term prognosis. My consulting practice was highly successful and continuing to grow. Financially, I'd achieved security that would have been impossible in traditional employment. Most importantly, I'd learned that vulnerability didn't equal weakness, that being disposed of during crisis could become catalyst for building something stronger than what had been lost. The experience with Northpoint had taught me that revenge isn't about destruction. It's about building success so undeniable that people who dismissed you must acknowledge what they lost. Quinn lived with the knowledge that his decision to fire me during cancer treatment had nearly destroyed his company and had cost millions to remedy. That knowledge was more permanent and painful than any direct revenge could have been. Today, at 38 years old, I run a successful consulting firm, maintain strong health in cancer remission, and advise companies on operation strategy. The woman who was fired during chemotherapy became the consultant companies compete to hire. The employee who was deemed replaceable became the expert whose absence created $5 million in losses. The person disposed of during medical crisis became the authority that organization now depends on for critical guidance. Northpoint remains a client, recognizing that operational expertise and institutional knowledge cannot be easily replaced, and now defers to my power. My successful consulting practice attracts talented professionals, valuing a leader who understands both technical operations and the human dimensions of organizations. We've built a reputation for improving systems while also understanding why they fail when people are treated as disposable. Our team includes cancer survivors who experienced similar employment betrayals. We share an understanding. Illness doesn't define competence, vulnerability can be overcome, and building independent value is the best defense against organizational cruelty. Our work is both practically effective and morally satisfying, helping companies build operational resilience while treating people ethically. 9 years post-diagnosis, I spoke at a medical conference on survivorship and career recovery. I detailed being fired during treatment and subsequently building a practice so successful the company that dismissed me became dependent on my expertise. The audience of healthcare professionals and survivors responded profoundly, sharing their own employment betrayal stories during medical crises. The validation of shared experience provided meaningful support for those who felt isolated in their professional struggles. After the presentation, a woman approached me with a familiar story. She'd been fired from a senior management position during breast cancer treatment. She was struggling to rebuild her career while processing the betrayal. What she said stayed with me. I thought loyalty and competence mattered. I gave them 12 years. But the moment I became inconvenient, I was disposable. How do you recover from that realization? I shared what I'd learned. You recover by understanding that their failure to value you doesn't determine your actual worth. You build something independent where you control the terms. And eventually, if they were wrong about you being replaceable, they'll face consequences of that mistake. Your job is to become successful enough that the consequences are obvious to everyone. That conversation reinforced why my story mattered beyond just personal vindication. Thousands of people experience similar betrayals during medical crises. Seeing someone not only survive but thrive despite that betrayal provides hope and roadmap for their own recovery. 10 years after my cancer diagnosis, I'm healthy, successful, and at peace with the journey from vulnerability through betrayal to vindication. The woman who was fired during chemotherapy built a consulting practice that makes more money and provides more satisfaction than traditional employment ever did. The company that disposed of me during medical crisis depends on my expertise and pays premium rates for access to it. The executive director who eliminated my position during cancer treatment now publicly acknowledges that decision as his worst professional mistake. Those facts represent complete reversal of intended power dynamics. Quinn thought he was disposing of someone who'd become inconvenient during a restructuring opportunity. Instead, he created the conditions for me to build independent success while his company collapsed from losing the expertise he'd undervalued. The irony is perfect. The betrayal that could have destroyed me professionally instead became the catalyst for building something stronger, more lucrative, and more secure than what I'd lost. That transformation wasn't luck or accident. It was deliberate choice to channel anger into building rather than into destruction. If this story showed you that people who dispose of you during vulnerability eventually face what they lost when you build undeniable success, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories about professional vindication, turning betrayal into opportunity, and becoming so valuable that organizations who dismissed you desperately need what only you can provide. Drop a comment about whether you've experienced being undervalued or disposed of and how you responded. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying people who wrong you. It's building success so complete that they must acknowledge they were catastrophically wrong about your replaceability. Quinn eliminated my position during cancer treatment thinking he was making a smart business decision. That decision cost his company millions of dollars, years of operational chaos, and permanent reputation damage. Meanwhile, I built a consulting practice that generates substantial income while maintaining the flexibility and independence employment never provided. Who won that exchange is obvious to everyone now. The executive director who thought I was replaceable learned painfully that operational expertise is rare, that institutional knowledge is valuable, and that loyalty matters when building sustainable organizations. The costly experiences endured by my former employer, which nearly destroyed his company, provided me with crucial lessons. I learned that workplace loyalty is rarely reciprocal, that individuals who deem others disposable will inevitably exploit vulnerability, and that true security lies solely in building irreplaceable value. These realizations became the bedrock of my consulting practice, informing my advice on organizational leadership, culture, and talent retention. The firms I now partner with grasp a truth Northpoint missed. Expertise is unique, institutional knowledge is non-negotiable, and discarding employees during personal crises creates lasting, destructive consequences. 11 years after my termination mid-cancer treatment, my career is flourishing. My health is robust and my firm is expanding. Ironically, the organization that once cast me aside now pays premium fees for the very insights they previously dismissed. My former CEO, Quinn, openly regrets firing me, acknowledging it as his biggest professional blunder, an act that nearly led to his company's collapse. I don't need his apology. My success is my vindication. The woman deemed replaceable now commands $5,000 daily to repair the broken systems, having entirely reversed the power dynamic by creating lasting, undeniable value. What happened to me became the strongest form of vindication, not by hurting anyone or seeking retaliation, but by proving value that no one could erase or replace. Now I spend my time guiding professionals who were abandoned or betrayed in their most vulnerable moments. I show them how to protect their work through documentation, how to develop skills that travel with them anywhere, and how to build financial buffers that give them the freedom to walk away when necessary. I remind them that company loyalty is rarely returned, and that the safest career is one built on independence rather than dependence on a single employer. What I went through, being terminated while battling cancer, taught me lessons relevant to anyone working in environments where people become disposable the moment it benefits someone else. My journey proves that being cast aside doesn't define who you are. You can rebuild, succeed on your own terms, and create something stronger than what was taken from you. Those who dismiss your expertise eventually learn the cost of their mistake. And when they finally realize losing you hurt them far more than it hurt you, that quiet justice is more powerful than revenge will ever be.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoy watching Karma, Payback, come full circle every week, we dive into tales of betrayal and poetic justice. Don't miss the next one. Tap the subscribe button and join the Revenge Squad.